Well, good evening, members, and welcome to Crown and Central Agencies meeting. I'm Fred Bradshaw, the chair. With us, we have Nancy Hepner, Lisa Lambert, Hugh Nerline, Warren McCall, and substituting for David Forbes, we have Kathy Sproul. We have two documents to table. CCA 84-28, Crown Investments Corporation of Saskatchewan, Report of Public Losses, October 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019. And CCA 85-28, Saskatchewan Government Insurance Responses to Questions Raised at the November 27th, 2019 meeting. We will now move on to our first item on the meeting notice. We'll be considering the 2017-18 and 2018-19 Saskatchewan Transportation Company annual reports. Minister Hargrave, could you please introduce your officials and make your comments? And I'd like to remind the officials that would you please state your name for Hansard when you speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll give you my remarks and introduce my officials, if that's okay. Okay. I'm pleased to be here before the Crown and Central Agencies Committee to speak to the 18-19 Saskatchewan Transportation Company final annual report. With me this evening to assist in answering your questions are senior officials from Crown Investments Corporations, Kyla Hilmer, President of STC, Travis Massey, Chief Financial Officer for STC, Cindy Ogilvie, Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of CIC, Joanne Johnson, Executive Director, Communications from CIC, and from my office, Angela Curry, my Chief of Staff. The report we are considering tonight is the final annual report for Saskatchewan Transportation Company. The report provides details of the final wind-up information through to the dissolution of the company on March 31st, 2019. The wind-up is complete. The assets have all been sold. The Regina Maintenance Facility sale was final April 30th of 2019. The total proceeds from asset sales was $27.9 million. Total cost to wind up STC was $7.5 million, $5.6 million in severance costs, and the balance primarily related to legal and professional fees. Included in the total cost are CIC's legal and professional fees of $0.7 million. And thank you, and we'll now take questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, Minister. Well, just while we're getting started here, I will now mention that coming in late is Mr. Stephen Bonk to join in this. Anyway, are there any questions? Ms. Sproul.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister and officials. I'm very pleased that we were able to reorganize this the meeting so soon after last Thursday, and I'm looking forward to the evening. So I understood we were considering both the 17-18 and the 2018-19 annual reports. That was what was scheduled. So if you're prepared to answer on both of those, I have a few on each one of them. Okay, thank you. Starting off then on page 2 of the 17-18 annual report, there's a reference to unused capital of $645,000 that was redirected to CIC. How were those funds used, and what were they originally allocated for? Was it a specific STC project?
I'll let the CFO for that answer that question.
Travis Massey, Chief Financial Officer of the former STC, or Saskatchewan Transportation Company. On page 2, the $645,000 that you reference is related to previous capital grants STC received while it was in operation. So as the company wound up, there was no need for any of those capital expenditures going forward, and it was returned back to CIC.
Thank you very much. On page 3 of the same year, there's an indication that there were 185,678 passengers that received rides on STC. Does the minister or CIC have any idea how many passengers have utilized this suite of replacement rideshare options? And yeah, I'll start with that. Do you track that?
No, on the rideshare options, you mean rideshare as in rideshare in Regina and Saskatoon, that kind of rideshare? Like,
Bus
like
services.
Uber? Oh, okay. You
Yeah.
don't mean like Uber or stuff like that? You mean bus services that are provided by the private enterprise? No, we don't track that. They don't purport to us. Most of our information when it comes to those services, I mean, we pick up mostly from the media.
All right. So you don't know how many companies are now providing bus services or?
Right. It's, we're aware of, and you got to realize that they don't report to us. And so we try to keep a loose tally on that. But there was 15. There have been some that have started and discontinued service. Most of them have claimed that is because of low ridership. So, and some have started, stopped and restarted, but with 15 different companies at our last count that we have.
Thank you. On page 4, you describe the total amount of salaries, wages, and short-term employee benefits. There were 224 people laid off that fiscal year, and we're just wondering if we could get a breakdown of employees by community, not by name, but by community. I don't know if you have that here, and if you don't, could you table it with the committee?
We don't have that with us here. We'll endeavor to we'll look for that information to see if we had it broke down by community, but we'll endeavor to provide that, what we're able to on that matter. Either way, we will get back to you. Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. On page 11 of where the statement of cash flows are described, there were dividends paid of $22 million. So where did those funds, were they paid to CIC?
Yes, that's money paid to CIC, and that's a portion of the sale of the assets of STC.
Thank you. I think I'm going to move on now to the 2018-19, because I think we only have 15 minutes for this portion of the meeting. Page 9, we have year-over-year expenses. Where do the employee severances appear? We're just wondering on the statement of the financial statements, where do the employee severances appear?
In the years 17, 18, or 18, 19, there was no severance costs. They were from before that.
All right, you indicated in your opening remarks, you referred to $5.6 million in severance. What year was that realized in?
So under accounting standards, once you have an obligation to pay severance costs, you have to incur the expense and set up an accrual or an accounts payable, for that matter. So that incurred in 16-17. So over the time period of 17-18 and 18-19, the cash would have actually been paid, but the expense is not shown in 17-18 or 18-19.
So the reference to the 5.6 million was the actual payments, but it didn't get accounted for, or well, it was accounted for in 16-17.
Actually, the 5.6 million was the expense piece. It wasn't the cash paid out. But essentially, those cash payments would have came out because we've expensed those.
18-19 financial statements, where is that payout?
So on page 8, you'll see that in the previous year, there was cash as well as a trades and other payables, which was 2.8 million. That would have been the amount that was incurred for severance costs. So that change would have been what was taken out of severance costs.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to leave that. Page 17, there's a reference to a sale of assets of about 2.1 million, and it seems to be for the Regina Maintenance Facility. Was that the price that the maintenance facility was sold for?
With the Regina Maintenance Facility, due to contractual obligations and with the purchaser and whatever, we can't disclose what the actual sale price of that building was. It is in the financial statements, but we can't actually disclose the purchaser or the exact amount.
Right. Commercial sensitivity. Page 20, under note 15, related party transactions, there's a reference there that the executive members, officers of STC were employees of CIC. Have all those former STC executives, are they currently employed at CIC?
None of the actual former executive are employed at CIC. Kyla and Travis are doing it on behalf of STC, but none of the former executive are employed with STC or CIC.
So how many executive positions were lost?
That's a simple question, I know, but we still want to get it right. You want us to follow up with you on that? He'll dig it out here, so. Is it 5 or 6? Eight positions.
What were the severance costs for those? Were they included in the number you gave me earlier? They would have been? See, Joanne's nodding. Okay. Mr. Chair, that's the extent of my questions for to thank Ms. Hilmer and Mr. Massier for your fine work in winding this down, and I don't have any further questions.
Okay, are there any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, I will now ask a member to move that we conclude consideration of the 2017, 18, and 2018 and 19 Saskatchewan Transportation Company annual reports. Mr. Bonk has so moved that we conclude consideration. Is that agreed? Carried. We will now be considering the annual reports and financial statements of Crown Investments Corporation of Saskatchewan. This includes 2017-18 and 2018-19 Crown Investments Corporation of Saskatchewan annual reports, CIC Asset Management Inc. financial statements for the years ended March 31st, 2018 and March 31st, 2019, First Nations and Métis Fund Inc. financial statements for the years ended March 31st, 2018 and March 31st, 2019. Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund Inc. financial statements for the years ended March 31st, 2018 and March 31st, 2019. Capital Pension Plan annual reports for the years ended December 31st, 2017 and for the 15-month period ended March 31st, 2019. 2016-17, 2017-18, and 2018-19 Crown Investments Corporation and subsidiary Crown Payee disclosure reports, and GradWorks Inc. financial statements for the years ended March 31st, 2018. Do you have, Mr. Minister Hargrave, if you have new officials, would you please introduce them, and do you want to make any comments on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I have a few comments to make, and firstly, I would also like to apologize to the committee and to yourself, Mr. Chair, and to all those behind the scenes when I had to unfortunately cancel the meeting last week due to a personal medical issue that I had, and I have gone and explained it to one of the committee members anyway, exactly what sort of happened, and it is getting much better, and I'm glad we could reschedule it so quickly. Also, Mr. Chair, there have been a number of changes to our officials since our last appearance here in December. Doug Kozlowski, who had a significant amount of corporate knowledge on these files, has moved on as at the end of December. And unfortunately, our president, Blair Swiston, is unable to be here this evening. So we have Travis, Wendy, Terry, Cindy, and Joanne are all here tonight. and I just ask for a little patience this evening. It's a small but mighty team, and I thank them all for stepping in. And I'll do some other additional comments that I have, and that I'll try to keep as brief as I can. I'm pleased to be here before the Crown and Central Agencies Committee to speak on a number of Crown Investment Corporation reports, along with other items the committee may have interest in. The reports for review today include Crown Investments Corporation, CIC Asset Management, Inc., First Nations and Métis Fund, Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund, Capital Pension Plan, GradWorks annual reports for 17-18 and 18-19, and pay disclosure reports. With me this evening to assist in answering your questions are some of Cindy Ogilvie, Vice President, Wendy Dean, Acting Vice President, Crown Services, Terry Ross, CIC Corporate Governance Officer, Travis Massey, Corporate Controller, Joanne Johnson, Executive Director of Communications, and of course still is my Chief of Staff, Angela Curry. The list of documents before the committee this evening is lengthy, so rather than focus on each specific report, I'm going to speak to a few highlights of the past couple of years for CIC and the Crown sector and the successes that we have been achieving. Since 2014, CIC, on behalf of the Crown sector, has contributed $1.2 billion in dividends to the General Revenue Fund. In 18-19 alone, the sector contributed $256 million in dividends to the GRF, surpassing the target of $206 million. Since 2014, the sector has recorded net earnings of $1.9 billion. In 2018-19, the sector recorded earnings of $540.6 million, an increase of $37.6 million over the previous year. After a few years of some very difficult economic conditions, the government has returned the budget to a balanced state. We're proud to say the Crown sector has been instrumental in achieving that. Much of the public focus on Crown sector centers around utility costs, cellular service, and investment in infrastructure. The government is focusing on investing in infrastructure to ensure the people of this province can continue to lead a high quality of life. Crown Corporation's investments provide safe and reliable public utilities to our homes and our businesses. That doesn't happen without investment in maintenance, renewal, and innovation. In other words, infrastructure or capital. Capital investment is key to maintaining that quality of life we have come to expect. Capital and spending in 2018 and 19 totaled $1.4 billion, relatively constant with the investment over the past couple of years. Since 2014, the sector has invested $8.2 billion in maintaining and renewing the infrastructure in Saskatchewan. The Crowns have worked hard and made important gains in managing costs and incorporating collaboration efforts to maximize savings and create synergies within the sector. The Crown sector is a major employer in Saskatchewan with 11,200 employees and a total compensation budget that is just over $1 billion annually. These are well-paid jobs that contribute to the provincial economy. Prudently managing the compensation expenses provides more flexibility to invest in the services that people expect. We also continue to monitor and manage the sector's debt levels. The consolidated debt ratio for 2018-19 of 60.6% is lower than the target ratio of 62.1%, the lowest rate in a number of years. CIC regularly monitors the Crown's financial health using the debt ratio as one of the measures. It ensures debt is carefully managed and benchmarked to industry standards. Given the state of the economy over recent years, this is positive news and another sign of responsible government. The Crown sector also plays an important role in ensuring services for Saskatchewan people and businesses are high quality in achieving the government's public policy programming. Whether it's ensuring wireless connectivity across the province, driving and vehicle safety awareness programs through the Auto Fund, or providing bursaries for Indigenous students, the success of the sector supports the government's priorities. The Crown sector is an integral part of communities in every part of this province, and it responds to every challenge, whether it's technical, weather-related, a service request, or an emergency. We saw this firsthand during the largest power outage in decades in December of 2018. We've also seen this during the wildfires a few years ago and other emergencies. Crown employees participate in teams with government ministries and emergency organizations to ensure the safety and security of our residents. This is the dedication that makes the Crowns an integral part of keeping Saskatchewan on track and contributing to the high quality of life we enjoy and building the strong communities and the province we envision. Now, this concludes my opening remarks, and now we're ready to answer questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, Minister. Are there any questions? Ms. Sproul?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Minister. It was an amazing summary of a lot of things that are going on, so always appreciative of the Crown sector. I'm going to start my questions this evening. I'm going to focus on some of the funds, as I guess I've signaled to you. And the two funds I want to spend a fair bit of time on tonight is the First Nations and Métis Fund financial statements and the Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund financial statements. As you know, the work on these funds is winding down, so I think it's very important to have a good discussion on the record tonight and make sure that we get a full understanding of the status of these funds and how things came to be as they are. So I'm going to start with First Nations Métis Fund, the 1819 annual report. I'll focus most of my comments on the current financial report, but I may refer to the 1718 as well. So if we turn right away in the notes to the financial statements on page 11, there's a reference there to the Muskowhegan Resources Limited file. And just to give a little background, I guess, as you know, the initial investment was in 2011 at $3 million. Currently, or I guess March 31st, 2019, it has been written down to $287,410. So from $3 million down to $300,000 in 7 or 8 years. So my first question is, how much of this loan has been repaid?
The Muskowhegan First Nation investment repayment, I mean, it has been zero, but I should mention, being we want to talk about that, how important the Muskowhegan First Nation opportunity was. This was an opportunity. Muskowhegan First Nation is on an incredible amount of potash, and by granting this loan and by looking at this, I talked to Chief Belrose the other day, and he's quite sure that potash is going to be needed in the future. This is a major resource that's right on the reserve, and that the investment that was made in that First Nation helped his people, but with more training, with more get ready for what potentially is going to be a great project. And while it has been unsuccessful so far and the repayment has been zero, we know, like I said, potash is going to be needed in the future, and people are going to be needing food. And this potentially for the people in his community could have provided employment for hundreds of people, and it was an opportunity that was there. And he said, it still enabled him to learn a lot of things that maybe they wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn. So he was on the board of Encanto Potash Limited. So Encanto's First Nation, or Muskogans First Nation, was accepted into the federal government's bridge program. This is one of the first projects in all of Canada where a First Nation had this opportunity. And it has been a great thing. His community was able to register their skills and identify gaps and get training. It is a shame that the downturn in pricing of potash did not allow this venture to go forward. I give them credit for seeing the opportunity and going forward on it. And I'm optimistic that one day, maybe not in the next couple of years, but one day that this potash mine will eventually go forward on Muskoggan First Nation and will benefit their people.
Mr. Minister, thank you for that. I'm just wondering why CIC would gamble taxpayers' money on penny stocks for a junior exploration company.
Well, part of it was the mandate of the fund was to help First Nations get into a larger, participate in the larger economic benefits of the province and projects to the economy of the projects, and that was part of that. And this was identified because of the large deposits that Muskoggan had on their property. Now, Encanto at that time, their financials were strong. Everything was strong, and we lent the money not to Encanto. We lent the money to Muskoggan, MRL. And but this was in keeping in tune with the program that was set out many years ago in 2005 of what we were looking for to help First Nations participate and benefit their communities.
I was fortunate to work on this file in my previous career, and I didn't see any requirements for First Nations to invest in Encanto. Encanto existed. Its shares were doing quite well at the time the investment was made. So what sort of justification did Westcap provide to CIC in terms of why this was seen as a particularly good investment at the time when it was, and my question was, this is a junior company. As you can see, what's happened is what's happened. Those shares are almost worthless now. And so how can the taxpayers of Saskatchewan see a return on this investment if indeed Encanto's shares never return, and I would say the future looks a little bleak for this particular project because Encanto simply won't be able to pull it together to get a mine on that particular reserve.
Well, the project, of course, that was a number of years ago that that investment decision was made. The project that, was a unique opportunity, was able to achieve milestones for this First Nation to become a partner and an active equity investor. So MRL, who we lent the money to, not to Encanto, MRL utilized the investment capital to purchase the shares, receive share purchase options. And this investment provided the First Nation with a seat at the board table and the voice as an active partner in the project. Now, at that time, that was just unheard of, that a First Nation would have that kind of an opportunity. Now, Encanto might not have been a mosaic or whatever, but this was an opportunity where that resource was on their First Nation, and give them that opportunity to participate. And it's an opportunity to participate, and it's still there. I mean, it's still there. That resource is still there and has that opportunity to one day benefit Muskowekwan First Nation substantially. So I don't see it as a gamble or as a risk. All these projects went through a strong due diligence process by both WestCap and the fund manager and by CIC officials before approval. Encanto at that time had good financial statements that showed that strength that was required to make this partnership work. Bearing in mind, it was a good opportunity for this First Nation and a very unique opportunity for First Nation to participate in this kind of a project.
Dan Muskowekwan was already at the table before WestCap. Now, do you know if WestCap approached them and asked if they would be interested in this investment, or did Muskowekwan approach WestCap? Or did it come from the CIC board?
I'll just point out that it was not the CIC board, and maybe it was just sort of a mislip there on your part there, but it wasn't the CIC board, it was the First Nation and Métis Fund board, not the CIC board, that was involved in this project. Now, and this was back in 2011, so which was covered off, I mean, many years ago, both in committee and by the provincial auditor, and nothing was seen to be amiss in those reports from way back then. It's easy.
Yeah, I just know you've said the potash is still in the ground, but taxpayers are out $3 million on this particular project. And we're looking currently, or as of March 31st, 2019, the fund is in debt $8.4 million. So this is important to the taxpayers, of course, as you know, and I think it's important that we get on the record why these decisions were made and how they kind of went so wrong, because clearly Muskowekwan is not in position to, MRL isn't in position to pay back to FNMF, and if I understand correctly, FNMF bought a $3 million 12% demand debenture and 100 Class G preferred shares in MRL. That was used to purchase 12,940,000 shares of Encanto Potash and 6.5 million warrants. So the idea at the time was that the corporation will receive payment of their debenture and interest from the sale of Encanto shares. Any excess proceeds will be shared between the corporation and MRL, with the corporation receiving 40% of the excess. Well, right now, it's 40% of the excess is zero because there is no excess. So this is an investment that's gone quite badly, I think you'd have to admit. And will there be any efforts to recoup the monies from MRL at any point? Do they have any other investments that they've entered into? Do you know if there's any ability at all to get any of this money back?
Cindy Ogilvy, Vice President and CFO of CIC. Just to provide some, I guess, background into the investment purpose, these funds were provided to fill a gap in the market. They're high-risk, inherently high-risk investments. Conventional lenders, such as a bank, would not provide investment funds for various reasons, whether they were new companies, startup companies, undergoing a management transition in the company, resource-based businesses, which we see those markets go up and down quite rapidly, or insufficient physical security for a loan. So there were some inherent high risks in these investments. The point of the F investments was similar to a lender of last resort, and they were made as a matter of public policy where private sector lenders were not interested. So therefore, it's not necessarily valid to compare the commercial outcomes to those of a bank or a financial institution. These are better compared to venture capital investors, and I guess the rule, I would say an informal rule in that industry, is that you have 7 or 8 out of 10 investments that will not succeed or may not succeed, and 1 or 2 or 3 that may come to fruition, but they come with fairly strong returns because of the high-risk nature of them. And that's the nature of these investments in the First Nations and Métis funds. So there's not an expectation that every investment will come to fruition. They were made for public policy reasons.
As well, I will add, we do have security over the shares. I mean, today, the shares might not be worth a whole lot, but we're optimistic that maybe one day that will happen. I mean, I guess technically, if we wanted to, we could sue that First Nation and sell those shares for nothing and sue that First Nation, but I don't think that's where we want to go. I think we were trying to help the First Nation here advance the peoples of that community, and I think we've helped them a long ways, and I think that by continuing to partner with them and remain partnering with them right now the way we are, that one day that this whole project will come to fruition and we will benefit. Maybe not today, maybe not right away, because we have to look at what's happened in the potash industry. In the potash industry, there's been layoffs at numerous mines from some of the major players in the potash industry. So we're optimistic that that industry will rebound. I mean, we have still the richest potash reserves in the world, I think, if not in the world. And we just know that we're going to have to continue to provide food for the world, and we'll provide fertilizer because the population continues to grow, and more and more food is going to be required.
Yeah, my colleague just raised a point, just that the reasons for winding down STC was that it wasn't turning a profit, but now you're talking about losing $8 million on very high-risk investments. I understand the nature of those. I would like to clarify, though, Mr. Minister, can you confirm for the committee that the loan repayment was tied to the value of the stock?
We're just condemning things. That's what it is. Getting reflected.
It was not tied to the value of the shares. The loan repayment, the loan was secured by the shares, and in order to help achieve a strong value, there was in the loan agreement a provision to actually share in any uptick in the value of the shares. So looking for strong value and helping to protect the public's investment by sharing in any profit that might have come out of it, but the loan repayment was not tied to the share value.
So the loan was to buy shares, and the repayment was to come from an uptick in the share value, but they're not directly related?
The loan repayment was, as long as they were receiving some profits, they would be able to repay their loan. But we did provide, or FNMF did include a provision if there was some additional profits achieved through an uptick in the value of the shares, there'd be some sharing of those profits back with FNMF.
Could you table that loan agreement with the committee, please?
We'll check on the confidentiality agreements, but we will endeavor to provide what we are able to in regards to that agreement.
Much. How many jobs for First Nations and or Métis people were created by this investment?
initial projections were, for initially, it would have been only like 40 jobs, but over obviously, with the potash resource and a potash opportunity moving forward, could have meant hundreds of jobs for that community in that area. But the projection was for 40, and there were very few on there because there was not a lot of additional development because as the industry started to slide.
What sort of readiness assessment did Westcap do to ensure that Muscowagan Resources Limited had the capacity to enter into this kind of venture?
Similar to an answer previously provided by the minister, given that this is going back to 2011, it has been part of a review at this committee and by the provincial auditor in previous years. There were no issues raised at that point. We don't have that information with us at this point. And given that we're here for 17-18 and 18-19, it's going back quite a few years.
Okay, well, let's just look at 19 then. I believe there was an additional write-down in just the last fiscal year, and there was another write-down in the year previous to that. So is Westcap working with, do you know if Westcap is working with these companies to maybe help them find other ways to divert these funds and actually generate some revenue, or does he meet with them on a regular basis? Does Westcap provide assistance currently then to Muscowagan Resources Limited? What are the connections between the management of this fund and the investors that have been set up?
Westcap has been actively working with Muscowagan First Nation. When I talked to Chief Belrose the other day, I mean, he couldn't say enough good things about the hard work of the whole team at Westcap. He talked about how they rolled up their sleeves and worked with them, working with them. There's limited opportunities currently. I mean, for them to sort of come up with that money for repayment of that loan, but you know, we still have security over the shares, and we still believe that long term this is a good program for Muscowagan First Nation.
Until 2017, the investment was still at about half of its original value. In 2018, it then dropped an additional $500,000, and in 2019, it dropped almost another $500,000 in 2018 and $700,000 in 2018-19. That doesn't sound like a lot of help. So I'm just wondering, given that the market is kind of evened out when it comes to potash, how is it that this investment has lost more, over $1.2 million just in the last 2 years? What's going on?
So under accounting standards, IFRS 9 financial instruments, which is the accounting standard that looks at these types of investments, the accounting standards look at the value of the loan. So the value of the loan to MRL, the majority of that value, they use majority of that money, if not all, to purchase Encanto shares. So in turn, under accounting standards, you would tie the value of that loan to the Encanto shares. So, but it needs to be a permanent decline under accounting standards. It can't be temporary. So, given the downturn in the potash industry, you look to see if it's permanent, which is a determinant of when you write it down. So in the last 2 years, it's become obvious that there has been a decline in the potash industry. So those write-downs incurred. However, it should be noted that they still owe us, the First Nation Métis Fund, $3 million. We change the value for accounting standards, but we don't actually change the obligation from MRL.
So when you have that $9 million deficit, does that include the write-down of Muskowhegan? Okay. If I understand correctly, Mr. Belrose is no longer the chief. I believe he stepped down recently. I saw a news story that was... So just for clarification, I did see a news story recently. He was going to move on to...
And we still call him Chief Belrose, but I mean, because he was involved throughout the process.
If you have any reports from Muskowhegan Resources Limited as to what his salaries were with Muskowhegan Resources Limited. I did see comments from band members that there was a fairly high salary being paid to him from this money that was given to Muskowhegan Resources. Do you get any reports from Westcap on that?
on a quarterly basis, Westcap provides the F&MF board with financial statements of MRL. There are financial statements, so they don't individualize salaries, but we do have the overall salaries of the Muskogum Resource Limited Company.
Would you, I know you probably don't have those with you tonight, but would you be willing to table those reports from Westcap to the board in relation to all of the investments? I would say going back at least 3 years.
We will have to review and see, because of the confidentiality, we will check into it, and on best efforts, I'll get back to you either way. But I'll make another note, as I've been informed that Chief Belrose is still Chief Belrose. He announced that he is stepping down this coming fall.
There you go. Thanks for straightening that out. I misspoke. I'm going to move on now to Infinite Investments, which is stated on page 12 of March 31st, 2019 financial statements. There are actually two investments here. I believe there was a $1.2 million, 12% 5-year debenture issued in 2013, and a $600,000 17% 7-year debenture with a company called Infinite Investments. Infinite is a company that is owned by Western Media Region 3, and they use the proceeds to purchase or provide a loan. So we invested in them. F&MF invested in Infinite, and Infinite gave a loan, a $1.2 million loan to a company called Force Energy Services, and then they purchased a 30% fully diluted ownership interest in Force Energy Service. I read somewhere that the purpose of this fund was to have majority share in these companies. So why only a 30% interest in Infinite Investments? Or sorry, in Force Energy Services?
Don't stand for that. Get a normal size chair. Pity's sake. So Wizard of Oz things are my whole Wizard of Oz trope is it's coming out again.
Well, the money we were in the program, I mean, maybe, I don't know if you were around when they developed it back then, or if you were after that, but yeah. We lent the money to Infinite. Infinite was 100% First Nation, and so we lent the money to Infinite. Infinite then had the shares and made the loan to Force Energy.
Was they only purchased a 30% share, and my understanding was that any investments that were done they were to acquire at least a half or 50% share of ownership.
So the money that was lent by the First Nations MAT Fund was to Infinite Investments. The objective of that fund was to invest in majority ownership of a corporation. So Infinite Investments was 100% owned. There was no rule that they had to invest in more than 50% of a corporation once they were lent that money.
Thank you very much for that clarity. The initial investment was $1.8 million, and as of March 31st, 2019, it was worth $250,000. So I'm assuming none of this loan has been repaid. The 7-year debenture is up this year, and the 5-year debenture is long gone. So why has nothing on this loan been repaid?
They have paid interest in the amount of $143,573 on that. The Infinite has security, and we have eventually we have security as well over the assets of that company, over Force Energy. Now, those assets are light standards, generators, other oil field equipment that is currently in storage. And again, due to the downturn in that economy, it's not the perfect time to sell assets. And if it was an upswing in the economy, right now those assets could probably put to use to generate revenue. So.
That Force Energy was actually struck from the corporate register, so it doesn't exist as a company anymore. So where are those assets? Who owns those assets?
Well, Infinite has the assets, and they're in storage. So Infinite has possession of the assets, but they're in storage, and again, we're optimistic that either they'll get put to work or sold at a higher value when an opportunity happens.
Infinite take possession of those assets. They belong to Force Energy.
Infinite had security over them, right? But anyway, we'll look.
My understanding is when you say they're not registered, my understanding is they haven't kept the name in whole, but I do know that Infinite Investments has security right over those assets. We know where those assets are located, so we are fairly confident of that.
Could you repeat that?
My understanding is when you said they weren't registered, I'm assuming, can I clarify that you mean under?
From the corporate register?
Yeah, that means that they just don't have their corporate name registered. However, it's our understanding, we know that we have the assets, we know where they are, and Infinite Investment has security right over those assets.
And you believe they're worth $260,000 now and no longer $1.8 million?
That is correct.
Right. Currently, there's one director on investments board, and her home is listed as the address for Infinite Investments. I don't believe she has any awareness of the location of these assets because there are no records at all of this investment in their office currently. So what sort of reporting is Westcap providing to them, Infinite Investments, or is he doing any reporting at all? Because they haven't received anything. And certainly, what is Westcap telling the board about this particular investment? Would you share Westcap's reports? I guess I've asked you that previously, but this is not what's being reported from Infinite Investments. So they are not aware of those assets existing or where they're located. So can you confirm how you know that Infinite has possession of these assets that are worth $260,000?
Westcap has had conversations with Infinite as well, and have assured us they know where the assets are. Now, if you have additional information that contravenes that, I would appreciate receiving it.
Could you let the committee know when Westcap had those conversations with Infinite?
Yep, we'll check with them and get back to you.
I just want to go back to the original loan. When it was initially issued, it was reported, I'm not talking about the loan from FNMF to Infinite Investments, but I'm talking about what Infinite did with that money, and you reported that in your annual report. So I want to ask some questions about that. It was originally reported as being owned by Brigden Welding, and then 3 years later it was reported to be owned by Force Energy, which is an entirely different company with a different structure. Was the board of FNMF notified of these changes, and did Westcap make those recommendations to Infinite, or what prompted Infinite to agree to the amended corporate structure of Force Energy?
just, I am told that there was just a name change, and it was prior to 2017, that there was no change to the corporate structure. That's what I'm told. But it was prior to that name change, did transpire prior to 2017.
Yeah, it happened in 2013. They were struck off in 2019. But originally, it was reported that the loan was to Brigden Welding. Infinite Investments gave the loan to Brigden Welding. And then, which was, 40% owned by Brigfield Oilfield Services, and there was a whole bunch of different shareholders in that company. But when Force Energy was created, it was 30% Infinite Investments and then 30% Brigade Oilfield and some voting only shares, and then Preston Brigden 35% and Glen Lawson 5%. If you look at the it wasn't an amalgamation, it was actually a reformation of a brand new company in 2013. My question, though, is that at the very same time, Preston Brigden started a company called Rival Energy, and again, majority shareholder in that. And that company is still filing annual reports and obviously going concern. So did Westcap make any inquiries into why Force Energy went under, but Rival Energy actually is still a going concern?
The First Nation and Métis Fund invested in Infinite. Infinite invested in Brigden Welding. So we don't have any other information on what other companies that some of the shareholders in that company might have or have. So.
This is $1.8 million of taxpayers' dollars that you invested in this high-risk investment. But is there no concern that the same company that was chosen by Westcap for Infinite to invest in was doing similar business in other companies in the area, buying a $100,000 muscle car with, we don't know with what resources? Was that part of the investment, or have you actually made any inquiries at all?
Give me a couple times, I'll interrupt you. I'll just say this, is we lent the money to Infinite, and Infinite invested in Brigden Welding. So we don't go into what people are purchasing privately. I don't go into your personal stuff, what you're purchasing privately. Now, don't interrupt me again, please. I've been courteous to you, and I ask you to be the same, okay? We're not sitting in the House now, we're sitting in committee. So we don't go into what people are personally purchasing. I mean, this is a company. We invested in Infinite. Now, you've asked a number of times, and I've answered the question. We have answered the question that we invested in Infinite. Infinite invested in Brigden Welding. So asked and answered.
Original investment was with Brigden Welding, but Force Energy was an entirely different company with a totally different corporate structure. Were there any investigations made by Westcap management at the time of that change to ensure that this was in order and that it was appropriate?
due diligence, when we were advised of that due diligence, was done on force, and I guess that's all I can say. Go ahead.
What I will add is, as Minister said, due diligence was completed once name change was complete. It should be noted, I think you've mentioned, just to clarify, Westcap did not bring Infinite Investments to us. The program was created in 2005, or 2006 it came into fruition, and then those investments, such as Infinite Investments, would have been proposed to FNMF, so Westcap wouldn't have seeked out sending a loan into, or an investment into Brigden. That would have been Infinite Investments' proposal.
According to Infinite Investments, Westcap presented them with the companies that Westcap thought they should invest in. That's somewhat different than what you're telling me, is correct?
As far as we're aware, and none of us were here at that time frame, but that Infinite brought that deal to Westcap and therefore to the First Nation Métis Fund Board.
Very interesting. Do you know when Westcap was getting involved with these investments and First Nation investment companies, did Westcap conduct itself similarly for all the investments, that the First Nation organized this company, found the investment they want, and then they sought out Westcap? Or did Westcap, was it actively involved in developing those First Nation companies so that they would be investment ready? Well, most of the ones that lost money, so the ones from 2011 till 2014, 15.
On that, if I may step in here, this is actually going outside the scope of what we're actually talking about, because you're talking about stuff that has already been through committee, and I believe that we should continue to work on our ones that we have before us, rather than going back to. And it's kind of, what it's been doing is, I've been hearing it's going back more and more all the time. I hear people talking right about 2005, 2006, and let's kind of stick with what we have.
I'm not talking about 2005, Mr. Chair, and in fact, I'm talking about page 12 of the March 31st, 2019 portion of the annual report, which talks about Infinite Investments, Inc., and the additional impairment of $486,000 in 2019, so I think, 2018, and then impairments of $78,000 in the last fiscal year. So those, we're trying to understand how that company got to that point. I will try to focus as much as I can on the current status of Infinite Investments, but I think understanding what sort of activities the fund manager is engaged in to recover the millions of dollars that taxpayers have lost, I think, is an important inquiry.
we should do, though, is try to stick as much as possible with what we have here before us.
Yeah, and one other point, Mr. Chair, if I can. I just wanted to make one other point that we did ask for Mr. Cook from West Cap to come to this table and answer some of these questions, but the minister said at the time that he was able to answer them all. So we're hoping he has those answers and will be able to answer them all, and we would continue to ask questions about the current management of this fund, which for infant investments is currently written down to $250,000 from $1.8 million. So it's a significant loss, and I think this committee, our job is to inquire and make sure that we get the right answers on that. So the minister has indicated he's able to answer all these questions for Mr. Cook, so that's what we're going to try and keep doing here, if that's okay. Next question. How many...
Yeah, I'd like to have just a little bit of reply. Of course, a lot of these things have been addressed in previous committees, gone through by the provincial officers, signed off. If you want to talk about 2017, 18, 18, 19, that's fine. If you want to know about the $489,000 or 40, then that's what we should talk about. We're more than happy to answer your questions for you. And we will continue. But it's not sort of a history down the road from the history of the start of the program. We have, over the number of years, you've had that opportunity in committee to ask these questions, and you have asked them. And, this has been reviewed by the provincial auditor and found to be fine. So we'll answer questions pertaining to 17, 18, 18, 19. And if you want to know about this $489,000, we'll answer that question for you.
186. Can you share with the committee how many jobs for First Nations and Métis people were created by this investment?
The numbers that we have provided is 4. That was the number that we projected number that we were provided.
Are those jobs within Infinite Investments or at Brigden Welding? And are they current jobs?
Well, being they're not operating, there are no current employees. I mean, there may be shareholders, but there would be no current employees.
There's no current employees. So the 4 jobs that were created, what were they?
of the floor employees, well, it was a rental company, so we don't have what the job descriptions were. Two of those four were Métis, and we know that. But we don't have the job descriptions as to what they were doing. But this company rented equipment to the oil field, so it would have been somewhat related to that field, but we don't have job descriptions.
Could you provide the committee with a list of the current inventory of the Infinite asset? You mentioned light standards and generators and all the things that are in storage. Could you provide the committee with a total list of all those assets and their value?
Well, we don't have a list of that, but we'll investigate into that, and we'll get back to you with all the information we can. We might not have serial numbers and stuff like that, might be under general security agreement, but we'll endeavor to get back to you as soon as we can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. In terms of the previous MRL, Muscowichan Resources, you indicated that very few jobs were created. Could you be more specific? How many jobs were actually created?
I don't want people representing.
You don't need to help. You just have to edit.
Need to take out some stuff.
You can see Johnny showing up, and I'm just thinking, what's going on today? I said I'd come over to your guys' side if you decide not to retire, but I can't get you there. You know that.
Here's that.
I find this out now. Did you get the message with Stephen? Foiled again. That's fine.
We don't have the exact number of employees that there were. It was estimated that they were going to employ about 250 people at one time. But obviously, it's another one that has not proceeded, so it's there would be 0 employees at the current time. But one of the important things to remember is that we're investing in this fund, through this fund, to the First Nation and Métis people, and trying to give them a leg up in participating fully in the full economy for them and their communities in Saskatchewan, and help and be there. And we think that was a really important aspect of the program, was to give them that opportunity. And unfortunately, a downturn in potash, a downturn in the oil sector. Unfortunately, it was hard on a lot of companies, not just these First Nation and Métis companies. It's an unfortunate circumstance that they did get caught in that, because this was a great opportunity for the peoples of their community. So.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I'm wondering whether Westcap ever disclosed to the fund that he actually approached the Clarence Campo Development Fund with the Brigden deal prior to Infinite Investments coming on the scene. Was that ever disclosed to the fund?
I think that would have been before 2017, 18. Wouldn't it have been?
Yes or no? You're not going to give an answer to that?
Well, I don't know, and it doesn't pertain to 17, 18 financials.
It pertains to
does it?
Westcap's management, current management.
Right?
I guess that's a non-answer. All right, we'll turn
What was
to
the
page.
question? What was the question?
Did Westcap ever disclose to the fund that he actually took the Preston Brigden deal to the Clarence Campbell Fund prior to Infinite ever being
The
incorporated?
welding deal?
Yeah,
Okay, that's, okay. You said Preston Brigden.
yeah.
What's the small modular swimming beach? That, I was thinking that was a perfect thing for you to get into as soon as you leave this place. Small modular swimming bridge factory. Do it great in those.
Will you invest?
What's that?
Will you invest?
I'll let you use my closet.
When the fund was started, and right from the brochure I'll read here, Westcap will make recommendations to CIC on potential projects. Westcap may also help investees by referring them to other sources of financing, including the Saskatchewan Indian Equity Foundation and the Clarence Campo Development Fund. So, I mean, Westcap probably was well aware of the Clarence Campo Development Fund prior to that. But as far as dealings with Brigden Welding, we're not aware of that.
All right, thank you. On page 15 of the 2019 report, under management fees, under the B section, it says the corporation also entered a management service agreement with Westcap Management Limited for the management of FNBDP at a cost of $50,000 annually. Effective June 1st, 2018, the corporation negotiated a change to the management services agreement regarding management fees. The management fees for FNBDP investments were changed to $4,375 per month. The management service agreement expires in 2020. However, as of February 25th, 2019, there were no FNBDP investments in the fund, resulting in the termination of the managed service agreement. Can you share with the committee what is the FNBDP, First Nations Business Development Program?
The First Nations Business Development Fund was a program within the First Nation and Métis Fund to facilitate investment opportunities and long-term job creation for First Nation businesses. It provided low-value, 0% loans to First Nation businesses to leverage other sources of private sector or financial institution capital. Loans were provided to First Nation businesses that related to printing services, farm and construction equipment, and oil production.
Where are the financials for that fund? I can't find them anywhere.
So FNBDP is a program within First Nations First Nation Métis Fund. So the financial results of FNBDP would be embedded in the financial statements of the First Nations Métis Fund.
They're not separated out at all?
No.
Okay, how much was provided to the project overall from CIC? There was, I think, 3 million budgeted early on, but was there any, what was the total?
So FNBDP, the First Nations Business Development Program, provided investments of $1.8 million for the program.
Provided investments to First Nations?
That's correct.
And how much was the management fee in total for that fund?
Mr. Chair. Just, we'll get the answer to this question, and if we could have just like a 5-minute restroom break.
Yep, okay.
Thank you.
That's right here.
What's the management fee? There's none if you set up a business in those days. Gratis. Small money.
Invest as well,
Yeah.
in addition to the fair.
You throw in the Opera House, we got a deal. Doesn't have the authority. We'll break it to the jail. To the jail. You're fixing that up. It's beautiful. It is, yeah. They're gonna put the town office in the top floor. And the library in the bottom.
But the space will still be there for performance.
Pardon?
They'll still have the
No,
performance.
no, I'm talking about the courthouse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because we have the oldest courthouse in Saskatchewan.
Is that restaurant still open, kind of on the outskirts of town?
It is, but it's not what you're thinking anymore.
Is it good?
It was really good, yeah. But, yeah, it's not quite what it used to be.
Yeah.
As long as the Canada Cafe's open. That's good. That's a good place. It's on those before you just- So they got 750. You go 1050, right? You want to go like, that's- Depending on how it goes, yes. It's entertaining, yeah. You already paid your price of admissions.
So if you go into the 1819 FNMF annual report, you'll see the management fees note. But if you also look at page 4, it has the management fees for 2019 of $134,750. Included in that number is for First Nations Business Development Program, there is $50,093 paid for the First Nation Business Development Program that year. For 2018, which is management fees of $241,826. The management fees for the First Nations Business Development Program for that year were $52,500.
So what kind of activities, sorry, oh, 5 minutes, you want, yeah, sorry, I'm excited.
Recess here for about 5 minutes or so, and we'll get back at her. Yeah, let's roll. Well, welcome back, everybody, and we will continue on. Ms. Sproul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Prior to the break, you mentioned that there was a $50,000 payment to Westcap in 2019, $52,500 in 2018, relating to the First Nation Business Development Program. Can you describe for the committee what sort of activities Westcap undertook in those 2 fiscal years in relation to that program?
Well, they continued to manage according to the contract, and our records indicate that in that time frame that they got repayment on 3 of those loans.
But that was for the business development program itself, so repayment of loans would relate to FNMF. But for the FNBDP, what sort of activities did the fund?
That's what I was, this is for the First Nation business one, FNBP. With the loans there, they were getting repayment on those loans. I mean, there was 3 loans that were, 2 that were paid out completely, and another one pretty much paid out as well.
And who received those 3 loans?
Fall Hills Quappel Tribal Council. And Sturgeon Lake. No. Right. It is Sturgeon Lake First Nation and Saskatoon Fastprint.
And how much did they receive? What was the value of each of those loans?
The
Five Hills Quappel Tribal Council received $250,000. Saskatoon Fastprint received $350,000. And Sturgeon Lake First Nations Developments received $267,500.
Just going to quickly add those up. That is 517 and 350. So that's about $867,000. And we were paying a management fee of $50,000 a year to manage those 3 loans. Do those show up separately in the financial statements anywhere?
So in the 2018 financial statements, if you go to page 11, which is note 6, there is an FHQTC 0% note. That would be the FNBDP investment that we're referring to there. And then if you go to page 13, the Saskatoon fast print on note 6, that would be the FNBDP loan there.
Lake one?
Sturgeon Lake. Oh, Sturgeon Lake is on the bottom of page 11.
Page 11, SLFN 0%. And then Red Dog Holdings has a 0% note on page 12. Is that also an FNBDP loan?
Yes, that is. And just to confirm, the previously when we listed the values, those were for the ones that were repaid, just to confirm.
So Red Dogs, how much did Red Dog Holdings get under the FNBDP?
Red Dog Holdings received $700,000.
So that comes up to about $1.7 million under the fund. It was originally a $3 million fund, is that correct?
That is correct. It was established as a $3 million program.
And I guess 1.8 has been loaned, and would the rest have gone to management fees then? Like, is it completely used up? Sounds like you paid $100,000 in management fees in the last 2 years.
Are you meaning out of the 3 million?
Yes.
Okay, just to clarify that. The First Nations program, as you indicated, was a $3 million program that was intended to be invested over 3 years in qualifying investments. So that there was a total of $1.8 million that was invested over those 3 years, as you indicated. The management fees and any other expenses are outside of that loan fund of $3 million. So it's not included in the total for that at all.
All right, so 1.2 million was not used then,
It's not
essentially, from that
invested
fund.
yet. The time period ran out.
So in the management agreement with Westcap for that program, would it be possible to ask the committee or the ministry to table the Westcap management agreement for FNBDP? And as well, I've never have asked for the management agreement for the FNMF. I have received it for a SIF, but not for FNMF. So I'm wondering if you could table that with the committee as well, those two management agreements.
don't think there'll be an issue with that. We have to check on the confidentiality, but I don't think that'll be an issue for, but you don't, do you have the other one?
I have the SIF one, but I don't have FNMF or FNBDP.
Okay, those two?
The two,
Okay.
yeah. Thank you, thank you. Just want to move on now to the investments overall in FNMF for File Hills Capel Tribal Council and Red Dog Holdings. Now, I believe both of those investments were for a joint venture with Ken Elson to purchase an oil rig. Is that correct?
That's right, it was with Ken Elson Drilling.
Now, I note that File Hills made a full repayment of the whole $1,250,000 in 27, as of April 1st, 2017, sorry, March 31st, 2018. So File Hills paid back to the taxpayer the monies that were loaned, but Red Dog's Holdings has basically been amortized to zero, and there were maybe, I think, no repayments. Is that correct for Red Dog Holdings?
So Red Dog Holdings repaid $200,000 of their loan.
And the rest has been written off?
So for Red Dog Holdings, the downturn in the oil industry took that oil rig out of operation. We were able to realize on the oil rig asset at that time, and we were able to collect $200,000. So the remainder of the loan was written off.
So any assets have been sold for Red Dog Holdings now? It's finished. I just want to compare these two because I believe File Hills and Capel or FHQTC purchased the same type of rig that Red Dog did. File Hills was able to repay in full, and Red Dog was only able to pay $200,000. They were both purchased about the same time. So how was it that File Hills was able to make that repayment given what you've described as the downturn?
Well, the rig that File Hills Quappel Tribal Council had, and which was a great partnership that they had, because it was the 11 members of the File Hills Tribal Council. That rig was operational and continued to operate, and still does operate, actually. So it was the fortunate one of those two that it never did impact, was not impacted by the downturn, where the other rig was. I mean, a number of the rigs kept going, and a number of them just shut down.
If I understand correctly, Ken Elson merged with Trinidad Drilling in 2015, at which point they were feeling the impact of the downturn. But since then, Ken Elson has reported, I believe there's 8 wells. I'm just trying to find that. In 2015, they had an active rig count of 8 drilling rigs in Saskatchewan. So you're saying the one that Red Dog's invested is sold off for parts, basically, but there's still 8 active drilling rigs. Do you know why the Red Dog one, I mean, was it just luck of the draw, or just unfortunate that Ken Elson decided to shut that one down and sell it off for parts? And what efforts were made by Westcap and the board of FNMF to ensure that that rig would have received the same treatment that the File Hills rig received, that it be kept in production?
Well, it is sort of luck of the draw sometimes. When you get experience a downturn in the oil industry and an industry like that, not all the rigs are going to remain active, and there's nothing that Westcap can do to force anybody to choose this rig over that rig. So it's fortunate for File Hills that their rig kept working and continues to work. And but it's been a little more of a prolonged downturn, and with them unable to repay, and they sold off, and so the asset was sold off to repay as much as it could on that loan.
Ken Elson has not suffered from the downturn. I mean, there was an impact, but they are generally still trading, and they are paying dividends to shareholders currently. And so how is it that they were able to choose to sell off this rig for parts and still make payments to their shareholders, but the taxpayers of Saskatchewan are now out, is it 1.8 million? I'm not sure the total loan to Red Dog. So what kind of deal did Westcap structure where Ken Elson was allowed to walk away from this investment and yet continue to make payments to his shareholders?
As you recall, we didn't lend the money to Ken Elson. We lent the money to Red Dog Holdings, right? And who partnered with Ken Elson in this rig. If you own a bunch of rigs and you can only put so many to work, I mean, that's the only option that you have. I mean, if there's one rig that's not going to go to work, or as a lot of those oil companies, and the fact that they're still going and still paying out some dividends to some people is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And the fact that File Hills rig is still working and is still providing revenue to those 11 First Nations bands and is still going. It's unfortunate that the Red Dog one wasn't as fortunate to keep their rig going, but it's a good thing that the File Hills one did. Some of those, and if you looked around at other oil companies, I mean, you would have experienced where they didn't manage to keep all their equipment going, all their rigs going, all their anything going. That's what happens in a downturn. So when you downsize and your company can remain profitable, and you can still pay dividends to people. I haven't checked on Ken Elson, but that's, they obviously downsized, made adjustments during the downturn to be able to continue to operate at on a much smaller basis.
Do you think it'd be fair to say, though, that the shareholders of Ken Elson did much better than the Saskatchewan taxpayers in this arrangement?
I know the File Hills Quappel Tribal Council as a rig that's working and making some money for 11 members of their tribal council. You know what? And I think that's a very good thing. I think that the fact that the Star Blanket Cree Nation, the Red Dog Holdings one, it's unfortunate that they didn't have that same success as the File Hills. So, it is the luck of the draw, but the File Hills one has been successful.
Yeah, I think my question, though, was it seems like the shareholders from Ken Elson did much better than the Saskatchewan taxpayers in terms of the arrangement that was made, which Westcap would have advised on. So was the board ever consulted on this or on the advisability of setting it up this way?
Well, these are higher risk loans, as you know, and Ken Elson did lose out as well. Obviously, they had ownership in this rig that was sold off for $200,000, and it's not generating any revenue for them either. But they still had ownership in that rig. So, did they pay a price for that? Yeah, they did as well.
I just want to go back to the management fees. According to my calculations, Westcap has been paid a total on the fund of about $3 million over the life of the fund, and I guess that would include the fees that went to the business development program. It looks like about 8 loans were managed throughout the life of this fund, which is now winding down. So if you take 8 loans and divide $3 million, they were given about $375,000 per loan. Just wondering why the board thought that was a reasonable expense to manage 8 loans.
I guess if you look at it, and again, you'd probably know more than me, because this agreement was done in 2005 with the former NDP government, of which I think your cohort there. And this contract that they made with them was sole sourced and done. We've honored that contract for these loans here. There has been good management on these. You can talk to a lot of the people that are involved in that. Westcap did provide good management. Again, this goes back with trying to provide First Nations and Métis peoples with giving them an opportunity, a leg up, basically, to participate fully in the Saskatchewan economy and better things for their communities and their people that live in their communities. I mean, this is a program that was developed by the NDP government. It's unfortunate that things happened the way they did in some of this downturn, but they knew at that time that these were not loans that conventional banks would do, that this was higher risk loans, and the fact that some of them have not been successful is very unfortunate for us all, for those people, those First Nations people, and the government.
If I understand correctly, the original agreement was renegotiated in 2011, and Westcap's fee was actually doubled. So if that's the case, maybe you could confirm that. If that is true, then why did you renew the contract and double the fees?
Wait a minute. You guys have to make a decision. I don't have to decide anything, right? All right. If we just veto it.
That's all it needs to be doing.
Like Trump, we just
Veto.
veto.
Presidential power.
We don't even know what we're doing. We just. 2 years. Fake news. And a veto. Make up news. Just as long as it doesn't mess up our small modular bridge. Yeah. So we have to be careful about that. I've now moved it into bridges. Period. It's not just swinging bridges. Get stuff in the military. I'm just thinking everything else. You make a diversionary tactic. I was like, oh, what am I swinging bridge? Swinging bridge. Sorry, there you go. Yeah.
Mr. Minister? May I address the minister? I want to give some clarification.
Mr. Minister, I have some clarification. In 2011, it was the FNBDP contract that was negotiated, and that doubled the management fee. So that's, I'm sorry, I misstated it earlier. So in that case, the Sask Party government actually did double the management fee in 2011 by adding the First Nations Business Development Program. I'm not sure if there's a question there.
Well, let me look at it. Let me
Yeah.
check. So, yep.
Well, there certainly is an inconvenient sort of decision that was made by not me. I'm just happy to find out. You know what I'm saying, Nancy?
I'm sorry, Mr.
Turns out it was all Tommy Douglas.
In the carriage house.
With the candlestick.
It was adjusted to the FNBP, but it wasn't for the same amount as the other one. So,
And what's the expiry date on the management contract? Is it 2020?
which one?
Both of them for FNMF, FNBDP and FNMF.
So you signed a sole source deal for the next 1,000 years. Is this what you're
Why would you do that? That's what Tom's looking for.
I wake up at 3 o'clock list of questions I asked myself. It's like, how good can I read that? What would Tom Pettis do?
Some have received the opposite.
It's a good thing I'm not getting into the juice. I don't have any time for my privilege. Never thought. I tell you, we're starting to get along. Hey, that's true, actually. It's all water under the small modular swimming pool.
I think that's what he was.
It's one of my fondest memories of those that go run around on the swinging bridge.
Well, we used to run our bikes across the, our friends to, get it going and then see how far you can, make it. Well, you wouldn't go in the water, but you.
There's a wall.
Yeah.
Kids go, it's a fun time. That's true. I get to the,
Wood River, the usual swimming level of Wood River.
Both of the contracts expire at the end of this year, December 31st.
Okay, thank you. How many jobs were created for both File Hills Tribal Council and Red Dog Holdings in relation to the investments that FNMF loaned them?
swing with the Fred, like so I'm pretty much ready for arms labor. Yeah. It's over. I gotta go back. I think I have a reason now that I'm not building for so long. So that's gonna be my edge for social studies. That and dodgeball. It's gonna look like a reign of terror. Trigger alert.
What do you get in PTSD?
I want to teach history. How about it?
Revisionist history.
Easy.
It's mouse land every day.
Let me tell you what Tom Pettis really got out of it. Yeah. Like, sing it, kids. Like a young Emma Bond, like, that's not.
She's so bad.
She's what?
Just like, she's in this contrarian phase.
I'll just clarify the answer from the last one there on the fees. The fees were reduced, we reduced the fees on to West Cap in June of 2018. And while the contract runs till the end of the year of 2020, fees were actually stopped in the fall of 2019. We stopped paying fees.
Was that negotiated with West Cap, or was that an option that you would have had at any point during the contract? You can reduce them.
That was negotiated with West Cap, and on the other one, the First Nation Business Development. The purpose of those loans was to provide low-value, 0% loans of $250,000 to $700,000 for First Nation businesses to leverage other sources of private sector financial institution capital. So that was the purpose of those, I guess they're not small, but smaller loans than the First Nation and Métis Fund.
Yeah, you shared that earlier. So on the jobs that were created for File Hills, the loans and the jobs for Red Dog, were you able to find those numbers?
We don't have the actual numbers, but they were both projected to be 15 jobs.
Presumably Red Dog, there are 0 jobs. And with File Hills, you don't know how many people are currently employed in relation to that drilling rig?
No, that loan has been paid off, but we don't know. But it was, as far as we know, it's still an active rig, so they'd be still employing. Obviously, it's about a 15-person rig.
All right, I'm going to move on to the Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund and those two for financial statements. As you can see, Mr. Chair, there's a ton of stuff here, and we could probably spend 3 or 4 days together. So unfortunately, we don't get to all of this, although maybe my fellow committee members don't agree. So I'm just going to hit on what we can tonight, and unfortunately, there's just no way to get to all of this all the time. I know that we have never really asked detailed questions about FNMF, so wanted to take this opportunity tonight to do that because we haven't been able to do that in the past. I did have a chat with you, though, about SIF in the last time we were together, which was actually my birthday in 2018, May 2nd, if anybody wants to take note of that. Yeah, thank you, Jess. And so I am going to ask a few questions now on that fund since we met. And one of the first things I wanted to ask you about, I guess, was the management fees there as well. It looks like you've also stopped paying Westcap for SIF as of 2019. Is that correct?
So May 2nd, right?
May 2nd, yes.
What am I counting? I'll bake you some, what are you cooking that? Brownies?
Go ahead.
So on page 4 of the 2019 or 18-19 financial statements, you'll see there that we've expensed management fees of $178,000 in 2019.
I have to find that correct financial statements. Page 4 of the 2019? All right. So then that puts the total of management fees for the life of this fund, which is also being wound down, and I think would be good to get some comments from the minister on the record for that, is over $8 million, probably about $8.4 million for management. I've just taken it out of the pay disclosure report. So 2011, 420,000, 2012, 666, 2013, 963, 2014, 1.25 million, 2015, 1.427 million, peaked in 2016 at 1.717 million, and then 2017, 1.45 million, 2018, about 600,000. And in the pay disclosure report for 2019, it was listed as 0. So that was how I got those numbers. And I know sometimes your annual reports are a little bit different than the actual pay disclosure reports, but they're also up for consideration tonight as well. So do the quick math. It is over $8 million and probably about $8.4 million. Now, the number of loans, if I have this correct, is about 148 over the life of the fund. And so that averages out to about $55,000 in management fees per loan. I'm just wondering, well, we could talk about the losses of SIF right now, but would that be I'm not a banker, and I don't know what banks usually charge for loans, but would $55,000 per loan seem somewhat excessive for a lending agency? 'Cause I-
You got to go on, we got to look at some of this here. The total amount of developer loans that come out of this Head Start, SIF, Head Start on a Home program was $481 million. So you got to look at it maybe a little bit in a broader sense. I mean, management fees, our numbers vary a little bit from yours. I mean, to 7.5 million, but what this is, this was a program that was developed in 2011 when the housing market was experienced an extreme shortage, and the management we went through, and it was standard commercial contract that's standard throughout the industry. It was done through an open RFP process as far as the fees go and the management of this program. 91% of these purchasers that purchased these homes, and that there was 2,224 homes. So that's a lot of homes. So 91% of them were first-time home buyers. 84% of them had income of less than $70,000 a year. So there's 74 total projects, 19 different communities. You know, we partnered with the communities and the different municipalities. We partnered with them. They figured out a project and a developer, and they come and we did that. Out of the 74 projects in 19 communities, only one was defaulted. I mean, that's a pretty outstanding achievement in my opinion. There was over 2,000, because you've asked lots about jobs, so I'm going to tell you there's over 2,100 construction jobs created, and that's pretty substantial when you get 2,224 families, homes completed for Saskatchewan families, and 2,100 jobs at a time when, I mean, there was an extreme shortage. I mean, you couldn't get a house like a house at this level. If you earned $70,000, it was next to impossible to get a house. So this filled that gap. This filled that gap very well at that time. It's a different circumstance today, but at that time, it filled that gap very, very well.
What was the total, I just want to get a sense of the total management fees that were paid for both FNMF and SIF. And then if you could give us the total of the current balance of both those funds.
So to clarify, so in the financial statements from the inception of the Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund, if you go to the statement of comprehensive loss, I can tell you for 19 and 2018, the management fees for SIF were $176,000. For 2018, they were $794,000. If you were to go back to the public documents and take those line items for management fees to the inception, that would give you the total. We don't have that here today. I think to clarify, I think the second part of your question was how much of the federal government loan outstanding. Is that correct?
No, I was asking for total debt as of March 31st, 2019 for both FNMF and SIF. Based on the balance sheets, SIF, I believe, is at $8.746 million, and I believe that FNMF is at $8.363 million as of March 31st, 2019. So those two funds total, if I'm correct, is $17,109,000 in debt as of March 31st, 2019.
So I would say that debt is actually in the upper section. So if you go to page 3 of the 2019 Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund, there's a line item that says debt obligations. That would be $2.8 million.
Debt obligations, but the deficit attributable to Crown Investments Corporation is $8.7 million.
Yes, that's not the debt, though, just to confirm.
Okay, well then I am talking about the deficit attributable to Crown Investments Corporation, which then is $17 million total for the two funds. Correct?
I can do the math.
It is. I did the math. And so I believe, based on the numbers I have taken from the annual statements, the management fee for SIF has been $7.7 million, and I believe for FNMF it's been $3.1 million. So it's almost $12 million, and we're currently, as of March 31st, 2019, and that is there is a deficit attributable to CIC of $17 million. For the taxpayers of Saskatchewan, how can you look them in the eye and say this was a worthwhile investment?
And there was a deficit in the SIF project is one project out of 74. That money was lost. And just so you know, I mean, that's still before the courts. We don't know exactly how much of that we're going to get back yet, but that's still before the courts, and we expect to regain a large chunk of that. Now you got to remember, as you're saying, how can I look in somebody's eye and say that? You know, I can't. You know, quite honestly, I mean, this was about 2,224 homes for people in communities when they couldn't afford to find a house to afford. This was affordable housing for those people, for 2,224 families. So that's one way that we can do that. A lot of these people were lower income people that couldn't afford to buy a home, and this program, this SIF program, helped them get into that. On the First Nation and Métis Fund program, this was a program to help First Nations peoples get into an area where they haven't been before, to get in and contribute to the overall economy in this province and establish things to an area where they couldn't, where they just couldn't get to before. This was an area that the previous NDP government wanted, and we wanted. We wanted to benefit the First Nations community, help them get that leg up to get ahead. We're not a bank. We were there to help. These are higher risk loans. We knew that. You knew that when you guys established the fund back then, that these were not just guaranteed loans. These were higher risk loans. But it was there to help First Nations and Métis people get to a point where where they could invest and contribute to the overall success in the province and into a level that they had never been before. That's why these were good programs.
In terms of the new home buyers, do you have any records of how many of them have had to default on their mortgage or have tax liens against their titles, or they're unable to sell because the price has dropped and yet they can't afford to make their mortgage payments anymore?
We're not the mortgage holder, and we don't track that. That's between them and their bank. You know, we're optimistic and hopeful that a lot of them are still in that same home. They've sold their homes. You got to remember, they weren't the $500,000 homes. They weren't the $1 million homes. So they were still affordable homes. And if you look around in the real estate market, you talk to real estate agents, they'll say those are the homes in that price range that are saleable.
Did you do, I may have asked you this back in 2018, but what sort of market assessment did you do that you were convinced that those homes would not be built if you didn't provide low-interest loans to builders in Saskatchewan?
Why I signed that 1,000-year deal, I'll never know. 1,000-year deal? Blank check, 1,000-year deal. What could go wrong?
All maintenance costs, your mortgage payments, taxes.
Periodic renegotiations.
I have a feeling that he may actually hold the shirt.
I'm pretty sure.
Because that looks pretty much what But the shirt is so funny.
We strongly heard from the municipalities around that time that there was a shortage in their areas. And that's why they, we put the program together. The program was put together to develop based on the input there. And the municipalities had the input as to what kind of development that they want. They looked at the developer, and but it was quite clear that there was a lack of housing at this level in 2011. And I remember back to then myself, it was a very tight market, and house prices were going up quite high.
Back in the early days, the board of SIF required the management company to provide some guidelines around anti-flipping. Did you check on a regular basis whether any of these units were being flipped?
don't have that in our records here, and Travis wasn't here, Wendy wasn't here at that time, but we'll look through our records, and we'll get back to you on that one as well.
Right, thank you. Back in, when was this now? Last year, early this year, I have to get the date, I'm sorry. There was a story, this is June of 2019, and one of the developers who sought funding under the program actually went to City Council, and he's complaining about an oversupply in the condo market. This is Northridge Development. And so I guess my question for you on this one is, how would you reconcile what the developers are calling a gross oversupply of condos with your definition of how SIF has been successful?
When did he come? Could you repeat the first part of that question?
Sorry, like this developer is saying there's a gross oversupply of condos currently, and how do you reconcile that with how you're saying SIF has been a success?
When did he say that?
Oh, June of 2019.
SIF was started in 2011, and developers kept building houses on their own and speculative. I mean, on that oversupply, SIF was a success to those people, those over 2,000 homes, to those 2,000 families. It was a success to those people to be able to get into that. It's a far cry in 2019 on the supply of housing in Saskatoon, where Northridge Developments is, than what it was in 2011. And one of the reasons all the developers, they kept building houses. I mean, and you can see from the population of Saskatoon, since 2011 to 2019, it's grown quite a bit. And and maybe some people, I don't know, but maybe some people thought that it would continue to grow at an extremely rapid pace. But that's, I mean, SIF is not part of that program. SIF was done in 2011 when there was a shortage in good affordable housing for people that were in income under $70,000. That was a good program for them.
Actually, the bulk of the units were built in 2014, 15, 16, and 17. Actually, 2011 there were 0 loans. In 2012 there were only 10 loans. But the most of the houses were built in the 2014 to 2017 period. So, do you think that your program through SIF created a housing bubble in the province?
Well, the answer would be no. And you talk to builders. I mean, they would love to have the program back. I mean, Northridge, for example. I mean, they were a participant in this very program. So, I mean, I think that there's two different conversations that one might have, because oversupply or undersupply is just based on one moment in time. It's not based on it's not based on over 5 years, it's based on today. Is there an oversupply today? And 6 months from now, there might be an undersupply.
You mentioned there's, I believe it's Windermere, the project that's currently in receivership and before the courts. There's also another building that was built in Weyburn, and I think it was called, I can't remember the name of the unit, but it was built by Kevin Ross. He was recently in court, the Office of Residential Tenancies. This was October 18th, last fall. And what the court said is that the owner of the building no longer was Kevin Ross, but it was actually Westcap Management. And I'll read what the hearing officer said in that hearing. He said, the tenant, it was a dispute about rent. Anyways, the tenant entered into evidence correspondence from Westcap Management. According to the correspondence, Westcap is the fund manager for the Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund, a provincial program, the purpose of which was to increase the supply of low-income housing in Saskatchewan by providing construction loans to builders. The correspondence indicates that such financing was provided to the landlord, Kevin Ross, to construct the rental unit at issue here, but the landlord did not repay the construction loan. As a result, Westcap petitioned the court for a possession order, which was granted on September 26, 2019. As of that date then, Westcap is the owner of the property. So I think you indicated Windermere was the one that was before the courts, but can you clarify for the committee what's the status of this building in Weyburn? Townsgate is, I'm sorry, is the name of the...
Downscape?
Yeah.
On the Townsgate development, unlike Windermere, which is going through a court process, Townsgate was just a receivership. Westcap has recovered the properties and we are selling them and we expect to fully recover on it.
How many units are left to sell?
I believe there's 5. I believe it's 5 that are left to sell.
Thank you. If I understand the intent of the fund correctly, is when the federal government advanced the monies to the province, they advanced them interest-free, and the idea was that we would be able to at least make some profit off the investments while the loans, no, okay, Travis is saying no. Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to deal with this debt, and I believe the minister feels that we'll recover some from Windermere, but is this fund going to turn back in the positive, or do you anticipate it will close out as a negative?
So to clarify, the intent of the fund was to essentially break even. It wasn't a moneymaker for the government. It was to develop entry-level housing, as the minister mentioned. And we had 1 out of 74 developments that went into receivership. I think that might probably answers your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to confirm on your question about they weren't interest-free loans from the federal government. The federal government charged us around 6 to 7%.
That's right, and you were able to invest it and earn interest on your investments while waiting for the loans to develop with the developers. Okay, yeah. I don't have much time left, and I just want to say over the years I've really enjoyed working with Crown Investments Corporation because this is my last time. But on March 28th, 2019, there was an order in council that allowed CIC to advance $8.75 million to SIF. So for the year in question, SIF got $1.7 million for 2018 and to 19, and an additional $7 million was provided for this fiscal year. Is that to what's the purpose of the loan?
Screen bridges, strikes again. Grant for that. He's the closer. Mr. Eye Candy, man. Just here to liven up the scenery.
I've offered. He's playing kind.
Don't grab light.
Don't get him in a screw.
On a roll.
The $8.7 million was a repayment to the federal government, and the shortfall was from the Windermere project.
Are there any other town gates out there, any others in receivership that Westcap has taken possession of on behalf of the fund?
In this fund?
Yeah, not that you know of. Okay. Where am I going to go next? I'm sorry. On the impaired loans, I know it was quite high as of the end of 2018 or 2019. I think it was up to $40 million. Can you update the committee on the status of that? Sorry. It was $40 million in 2018. This is page 13 of March 31st, 2019. And the impaired loans are at $28 million at the end of March 31st, 2019. None were at stage 1. Stage 2 was 9.3 million, and then stage 3 was 19.2 million. Of that 19.2 million, how much of that was the Windermere project?
It's a show.
So on page 13 of 2018-19 annual report for Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund, Inc., I think you're referring to the table below. If you just go slightly to the table above, so under accounting standards, the 28,520 or 28.5 million, of that amount of gross loans, only 12.351 million was actually impaired. So under accounting standards, you have to show if there's any portion of a loan, what the gross amount of that loan was. The 28 million doesn't reflect the full impairment.
So 12.351 million reflects the impairment then?
Yes, that's correct, and the majority is related to Windermere, and we don't expect any more future allowance for credit losses.
I think I'm allowed one more question. On page 3 of that same financial statement, there's this is a statement of financial position under liabilities and deficit. You have trade and other payables for this year or that year as 647. The previous year is 477. I believe that is the West Cap fee, and I'm just wondering why it's described as a trade and other payable.
Just one, promise.
Fred, so instead of, he said instead of 1023, 1024 was totally built.
I heard that. Is it 10? It's 10.
Unless we get some obstruction timing stuff. Then all bets are off. Yeah, we can get together and have a little start spatial there.
So on page 3, the trade and other payables, under International Financial Reporting Standards, there's categorizations under the Statement of Financial Position that you're required to label anything outstanding, and one of those categories is trade and other payables. So any management fees related would fit into that category under accounting standards.
Paid yet?
That's correct. That's what hasn't been paid.
Good old IFRS. Again, thank you very much. One of the suites that was listed on the Head Start on a Home website was listed for $600,000, and it was referred to as the Glam Suite. It was a gorgeous luxury 2-bedroom apartment featuring elegant high-gloss laminate cabinetry, quartz countertops, luxe lighting, and sleek oak floors. You can get one of these starter homes from anywhere to, I'm being sarcastic here, but $300,000 to $600,000 and $3,000. So how does that fit into the average MLS listing? This was in Saskatoon. And how does that fit into the parameters of the program?
Just that your closet.
What's that?
Is that the package available in your closet?
Well, we upgraded that.
To the glam package.
No, we upgraded from the glam package. So this,
So it's going to bridge.
The super glam package?
yeah, it's
What
super.
are we talking?
Super glam.
Indoor waterfall?
Super glam concept. Water slide.
It's pretty much dumpster diver package, that's what I want to mention.
Here's your gunny sack.
Countertops, who needs that? Countertops, who needs that?
Well, I've ripped the rug out of my condos, I'm just walking around in plywood right now. Are you still in your town? No, no. Where did you move to? My husband's house. Oh, okay. In Saskatoon? Yeah, we bought a retirement condo, and one of my girls is house sitting until we get rid of his house. But we already sold mine in town. Retirement condo. By the river. But my house, sold it at asking 4 hours after listing. Really? When? When did you sell it? April. Last April. And I just sold this 8 hours after listing. So, well, it's the neighbor. That's in, no, this is up on Alexandra.
Oh,
Yeah. because nobody sells them, or they don't sell because nobody wants to buy them?
No, they never go for sale, they just get passed around the families.
Yeah, there's some already sold places. Is that Stone across,
From the Opera?
Oh, the little one, yeah.
Yeah.
The old McGee house.
Calls back.
That's a great idea.
So the price of, when the municipalities came to the Head Start on Home program, the price that was set was the average MLS price. So the average MLS price would be the used listing price.
Yeah, but these were $600,000, so it's not average.
They were, how many homes were there?
There's, I don't know how many were listed at $600,000, but I know of one for sure in Saskatoon.
Sure.
I didn't look at all 2,000 units.
Yep.
Anyways, I think we're out of time, and I don't know if you guys know about that one. So thank you to all the committee members, to you, Mr. Chair, to you, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much for the good discussion, and I appreciate the answers. So thank you very much.
Well, seeing no more questions from the committee, I'll now ask the member to move that we conclude consideration of the 2017-18 and 2018-19 Crown Investments Corporation Saskatchewan annual reports. The CIC Asset Management, Inc. financial statements for the year ended March 31st, 2018 and March 31st, 2019. First Nations and Métis Fund, Inc. financial statements for the years ended March 31st, 2018, March 31st, 2019. Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund, Inc. financial statements for the years ended March 31st, 2018, and March 31st, 2019. The Capital Pension Plan annual reports for the years ended December 31st, 2017, and for the 15-month period ended March 31st, 2019. The 2016-17, 2017-18, and 2018-19 Crown Investments Corporation and subsidiary Crown PE disclosure reports, and the GradWorks, Inc. financial statements for the year ended March 31st, 2018. Yeah, I need somebody. You did, oh, Nancy. Excuse me. Ms. Hepner has moved that we conclude consideration. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. This concludes our business for this evening. Minister, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the members of the committee, and I especially want to thank Ms. Sproul, because this is her last kick at this cat. And, you know, and Mr. McCall, I guess, I mean, he didn't ask too many questions, but he was here in support, and that's good. And it's his last kick at this one as well. So, and answered, because they always are here, and I don't know, they sit up there, they don't ask any questions, and they just do their job. Boy, that's nice, that's great. And you, Mr. Chair, you just run a great committee, and your support staff there. And I won't say much about the rest of these guys here. The Hansard guys, yeah, I said they sit up there, they do all the hard work. I mean, he tries to make sense of what we're all saying. So I appreciate everybody. I appreciate my staff. Considering my two senior people weren't here, that all my staff here, all my officials here did a good job, and we'll get back to you on a number of answers. But we thank you for your patience in regards to that. So that'll be it for me, Mr. Chair. And once again, thank you, and everybody have a good evening.
Okay, seeing we have no further business today, I will ask a member to move a motion for adjournment. Ms. Lambert has so moved. Is that agreed? Carried. This committee stands adjourned to the call of the chair.